You came back to hear Takima talk. That's what's up. Now, if you're new here, please, I encourage you to go back and check out Series 1 because we're building. Walk with us. Now, let me tell you something before we get into Series 2. I grew up in a place called River Park Towers, and it's in the Bronx. It's right off Cedar Avenue. Yes, Cedar Avenue, the same place hip-hop was born. I went to school in Harlem from the first grade through high school. So I slept in the Bronx, but I went to school in Harlem. Yes, the same streets that began the Harlem Renaissance. I always say that the Bronx gave me my rhythm. Harlem matured my soul and my intellect. So when I tell you what I'm about to tell you in this series, I'm not speaking from a textbook. I'm speaking from not some long distance. I am speaking from inside, from the block, from the community. I am speaking to you from the culture itself. And here is what this series is about. Every system in this country was designed to ensure that Black Americans did not rise, right? Plenty of examples. Planned Parenthood, government subsidies, the crime bill, the school to prison pipeline, the destruction of the Black family, all of it by design. And yet, the culture the entire world lives inside of, that's ours. The music in your headphones, the slang on your tongue, the fashion on your back, the commercials selling you the products every single day, it's ours. It's built by the people who were never supposed to still be here. It was built by the people who were never supposed to be this powerful, who were never supposed to know their history, never supposed to be this everywhere. And I watched it happen from my block. So the question that this particular series asks, how did we build world culture while you were trying to erase us? Now let's get some balance here and let's level up some respect. Welcome back to Takima Talks. This is Series 2, titled, Quietly, We Run It All. Now, let me be very clear about something, okay? Just so we're all on the same page. The condition of Black America is not an accident, right? It was not laziness. It was not the culture. It was not a lack of ambition. It's not a lack of intelligence. It's not a lack of family values. Are we on the same page that it was engineering? It was deliberate, it was documented, and it was designed. Okay, now let me give you the clinical definition of systemic oppression. The book says it is when institutions and policies of a society are structured to produce a disadvantage for a specific group regardless of individual effort or merit. Now trust, that's not a theory, but that's American history. Plenty of examples. Planned Parenthood locations are disproportionately in Black communities, and that's not a coincidence. Government subsidies were designed to create dependency, not elevation. Designed to keep a population manageable, not mobile. The school to prison pipeline, that's a real thing. Underfunded schools, that's a real thing. Preparing a population to fill the industrial prison complex, it's a real thing. All of it is connected, all of it is intentional, and all of it is documented. Now here's the clinical piece. When you engineer failure around a population for generations, the trauma doesn't just live in the community. As I've said, it lives in the body. And in the body, it is passed down and becomes intergenerational. That's not a weakness. That will happen in any human placed in a system that was designed to break them. So the miracle isn't that some didn't make it. The miracle is how many of us actually did. I'm Takima. This was part 1. In part 2, we're talking about the crime bill, Biden, Clinton, and what it actually did. 1994 is the year. Okay, let that sink in, 1994. Now, because in 1994, something happened and it kind of changed the trajectory of Black America for generations. And obviously it didn't start there. The Violent Crime Controls and Law Enforcement Act, you probably know it as the crime bill. It was introduced by House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jack Brooks, largely crafted by Senator Joe Biden, signed into law by then President Bill Clinton. And years later, Clinton himself came out and publicly apologized for that bill. Now, you ask, why would a former president apologize for legislation that he signed into law? And he did that because the damage was undeniable. The bill did not just get tough on crime. It exploded the prison population. It introduced mandatory minimum sentences. It incentivized states to build more prisons, and it targeted black men specifically and disproportionately. Now, while black men were sentenced to years in prison for non-violent, petty drug charges, Mr. Jeffrey Epstein, a convicted and documented predator of children and a registered sex offender, when he was sentenced, he got a mere 16, I don't know how many months in jail, but he was allowed out of jail for 16 hours a day throughout the whole sentence. Tell me who that system is built to protect and who it is built to target. Now, here's the clinical piece. When you remove fathers from homes at that scale, when you incarcerate a generation of black men, you don't just damage individuals, you fracture families, you traumatize children, you create attachment wounds that last for decades. And then society looks at those children and calls their behavior a cultural problem. No. That's engineering. That's an engineered wound being blamed on the wounded. The school to prison pipeline didn't just build itself. It was built on the foundation of that bill. I'm Takima. This was part 2. Listen, in part 3, they didn't just incarcerate the men. They broke the whole family and they did it on purpose. I'm going to show you how. The breakdown of the black family in America, it wasn't a cultural failure. It was a policy decision. In 1935, the Social Security Act created aid to help children, and it sounds like help, but it was actually a trap. In order for a black mother to receive assistance for her children, the father had to be absent. The government didn't just remove black men through incarceration. It financially incentivized their removal from the home. You want to eat, he has to leave. You want to keep the lights on, he's got to go. Y'all remember the movie Claudine? If not, go look it up. But that's not a safety net. That's an engineered fracture. Okay, now here's a couple of receipts. From 1890 to 1950, black women actually had a higher marriage rate than white women. And only 9% of children live without a father. If you want to tell me that's a cultural problem, I'm going to say no. I want you to show me a culture that changed that dramatically within the span of 30 years on its own. You can't, because it wasn't the culture that changed. It was the policies that changed. And while black families were being demolished at the same time, white farmers were given welfare for their land, their crops, and their children without the fatherless condition attached. Same government, same era, 2 completely different sets of rules. Now that is not a coincidence. That is a policy target. And here's the clinical piece. Attachment theory tells us that children need a consistent, present, and stable caregiver to develop that secure attachment needed in life. Secure attachment is the foundation for everything. Emotional regulation, academic performance, healthy relationships, self-worth, you name it. When you deliberately remove fathers from homes at a policy level, you don't just break a family. You break the developmental foundation of an entire generation of children. And then you call those children at risk. At risk from what, you might ask? They are at risk of the exact outcome that you engineered for them. That is systemic psychology at its most calculated. I'm Takima. That was part 3. Look, in part 4, the lie didn't stop there. Every immigrant group that comes to America inherits it. All right, let's get into something that's not widely discussed or not discussed enough. And that's this racial thing in America is not just a black and white issue anymore. Because everybody who comes here inherits it. Every immigrant group that arrives on American soil steps into a system that was already built and it was already decided. And somewhere in the process of them trying to survive in a new country and assimilate, many of them adopt the lie. And it's not always conscious, not always malicious, but they adopt it. See, that's not an accident. That is the architecture of the system working exactly how it was designed to. And here's what makes it particularly painful. Some of the most toxic anti-black racism in this country today doesn't even come from white Americans. It comes from immigrant communities who learn the hierarchy before they learn the history. See, they learn what black men in America before they learn what black people built in America. And here's the clinical piece. Social identity theory tells us that human beings naturally seek to affiliate with groups that carry higher social status. So when you arrive in a country with no social capital, no language fluency, no established community, and no network, aligning with the dominant group, it feels like survival. So distancing from black people feels like elevation. But here's what I need you to know. Every immigrant community needs to understand that the very same system that taught you how to look down on black Americans is the same system that has a plan for you. You are not at the top. You were just handed a position above us to keep you distracted from looking up. Does that sound familiar? Because we discussed that in series 1 as well. The misdirection never changes, only the target. I'm Takima. This was part 4. Now in part 5, we're going to flip it. Because despite everything we just talked about across the 4 parts of this series, this very small population of black Americans built the culture the entire world lives inside of. The numbers alone would shock you. See you there. Let me go ahead and give you some numbers. Now, black Americans represent roughly 13% of the United States population. That's 13%, right? Now, that's not even close to a majority. And then they say it's about 1 out of every 8 people. And yet, that 13% produced jazz, blues, rock and roll, hip hop, every dominant genre of American music that the entire world listens to came from 13% of the population. That 13% gave the world a movement vocabulary, the dances, the gestures, the swag, the cool that everyone on the planet spent billions of dollars trying to replicate. That 13% produced the most quoted, sampled, most referenced athletes, artists, entertainers, and cultural figures in modern history. Muhammad Ali, Michael Jackson, Michael Jordan, Maya Angelou, Prince, please. The world doesn't just know these names. The world worships these names. Now here's the clinical piece. Post-traumatic slave syndrome. Now that's a framework that it was developed by Dr. Joy DeGruy. And she tells us that descendants of enslaved people carry this multi-generational trauma in their bodies, in their nervous systems, and in their behavior patterns. In other words, everything black Americans have built and created was built and created while carrying a wound most people couldn't even imagine. Not despite the trauma, but right alongside the trauma. Now, that's not just resilience. That is the most extraordinary cultural output in the history of human civilization, in my opinion. Remember, just 13%. Come on now. Quietly, we run it all. I'm Takima. That was part 5. Part 6, the fashion, the style, the look the whole world copied. Who got paid for it? and who didn't.